So about 20 years ago, there was this incredibly charismatic, sort of suave striker that came out of Italian football. His name was Christian Vieri, and he was very popular all around the world. He scored 23 goals for Italy in internationals. People absolutely loved him. And when he was a kid, he had a picture of Alan Border on his wall. These two things are linked in a really, really weird way, because anyone who knows Alan Border knows for all the incredible attributes he had in cricket, suave, not really one of them. He wasn't thought of as cool. But to a young Christian Vieri who was growing up in Australia, he thought Alan Border was incredible. So he had him on his wall. Alan Border captained Australia for like a kabillion years, right? He was not suave. He was not striking. He was a gritty grind, incredible test batter, and, turned Australia into, this machine-like side, but he did it through sort of facial expressions and everything else. Whereas Christian Vieri was this free-striking footballer, but also he's an Italian footballer, and Alan Border was an Australian cricketer. The idea that Vieri would grow up with Border on his wall is so bizarre. But then you need to know a little bit about the relationship between football and cricket, or maybe Australia and Italy. In the 1970s and 80s, a lot of people from Italy started to migrate to Australia. And Christian Vieri was one of those people. He would eventually obviously go back to Italy. And maybe one of the reasons he went back to Italy is because football was so much stronger there. And obviously Vieri wanted to play football, and he specifically wanted to play football for Italy, right? But you already start to see this pattern taking place. So that explains how Vieri started in Italy, went to Australia, and then picked up football and went back to Italy. But Vieri and Border are not the only link that football has to cricket. Because of course, as we've mentioned before, the football team AC Milan also started out as a cricket team. So there has been cricket in Italy for a very long time. And obviously, at a certain point, if you go back far enough, football and cricket always sort of merge a little bit. But the reason we're talking about Vieri and Border and AC Milan is because the Italian men's T20 team just got to the Cricket World Cup. Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs. And Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting. Italy have just beaten Scotland a little while ago. Because of that, they qualified for the World Cup. They also beat some other sides as well. In fact, they've been building a pretty good team for a while now. So it's no real surprise that they would end up in a World Cup. It's maybe more of a surprise they beat a team as good as Scotland, who have also been a pretty good team at various points. But maybe that just shows you how good Italy, or the Azzurri, have been. But if you skip things like AC Milan, the best place to start with Italian cricket is actually a guy called Scaderi. Joe Scaderi. He was an absolute cult icon in Australian domestic cricket in the 90s, mostly playing for South Australia. He had this incredible mullet. He could whack him a little bit, but he was great with the Yorker, and everyone loved him. Problem was, of course, he wasn't quite good enough to play for Australia. He did play for Australia at the youth level, and he was also good enough to play first-class cricket in Australia and then go over to Lancashire and do the same. But one of the reasons that Joe Scaderi could go over to Lancashire is because he had an Italian passport. And so because of this, when he wasn't playing in Lancashire League cricket or for Lancashire or in the UK in general, he would be representing Italy. This was absolutely fine for a while, but the ICC had different regulations than European cricket had. There's a great thread by Andrew Nixon about this on Blue Sky if you want to find it. And essentially it's all boiled down to what it means to be Italian. In Italy, they thought that Joe Scaderi qualified for being Italian. But the ICC said no, he doesn't. And it's to do with whether you're born in a country or live in a country. And Joe Scaderi didn't do either of those things. But the Italians were like, he's still Italian though. So Italy actually say to the ICC, we're going to take you to the Court of Arbitration in Sport because we do believe he's Italian. And we very much want Joe Scaderi playing for our team. That basically changes the eligibility for associate teams. And Scaderi goes on to play for Italy for ages. And not only that, but he coaches them as well. He's a huge part in why Italian cricket was actually so strong. But remember that Scaderi's family had moved to Australia generations earlier in order to immigrate there, which makes complete sense, right? And just as a weird aside, remember that Italy has a city called Monfalcone in which a lot of Bangladeshis immigrated to, and then they went out of their way to ban cricket. Immigration doesn't always go great for our sport. But Italy used to have a regulation that meant that anyone who had any relative who was born in Italy after 1861 could actually be thought of as an Italian citizen. Joe Scaderi would have been under that. It's actually recently changed, and now it's one grandparent. But either way, it meant that a lot of people around the world, specifically for our story, around the cricket world, can qualify to play for Italy. This is Emilio Gay, a hard-hitting player from Durham, whose dad is from Grenada, but his mum is Italian. This is Gareth Berg, a long-time county pro who plays for Italy and coaches Italy. This is Grant Stewart, who plays for Kent, who is also qualified to play for Italy. And all of these guys as a collective played their role in beating Scotland. In fact, under the regulations of Italy, there's quite a few players that you've probably heard of before who also would have qualified to play for Italy. Like Michael Di Venuto, who played ODIs for Australia, Jay Dernbach, who played a lot of limited overs cricket for England, or Phil Hughes, who was a test opener for Australia. Italian cricket have realised that there's lots of guys like this out there, and so now they have been starting to recruit them, which of course makes them a better cricket team. Now, of course, a lot of people don't like this. They don't like the idea of immigration affecting cricket teams. But it is worth just having a look at Australia. Because in their first ever test match, they had a guy called Charles Bannerman, who you may have heard of because he still holds a record in test cricket today, which is the highest percentage of runs in a completed test innings. Charles Bannerman was not born in Australia. In fact, 5 of Australia's 11 players were either born in England or Ireland. South Africa's first team also had a bunch of people born in England as well. When cricket teams start, they often do it with people from other cricket nations in there. You can like this or not like this, this is the history of our sport. So after trying people like Di Venuto and Dernbach, who were sort of at the end of their career, Italy went to recruit players like Gay and Stewart, who are more in their prime. That brings us to the Menentis. This is a name you might have heard in cricket, depending on how much you follow the Big Bash, because they've been around in the Big Bash quite a bit. They are people who can qualify to play for Australia, and as it turns out, they are people who can qualify to play for Italy as well. And so they did. And one of them took 5 for 31 against Scotland. If you are a Scottish fan, this video is perhaps not for you. But perhaps the biggest name player of recent times, who is still fairly close to his prime, is another Joe, Joe Burns. Say what you will, but Italy have done very well with the Joes. Joe Burns played 23 test matches for Australia. He averaged in the high 30s. He played some good knocks. He maybe wasn't quite a test match level player, but he wasn't far off it either. And so it turns out that Joe Burns also qualifies for Italy. And so once he stops playing for Australia, he then waits a couple of years and then he can qualify for Italy. He says it's about honouring his grandparents and also his brother that passed away not that long ago. In fact, when he plays for Italy, he uses the number 85 on his back, which was his brother's old number. Now, quite clearly, when we think of Italy, we usually think of football. But there is another interesting connection between Italy and Australia. No, it's not what Vieri had on his wall. So the Italian cricket team has a lot of people with Australian ancestry or have even learnt the game in Australia. But back quite a few years ago, the Australian football team, or soccer as we call it there, was not a particularly good side for a long period of time. They didn't go to World Cups or anything like that. But then through the 80s, 90s and 2000s, they got a lot better and started to qualify for the World Cup quite regularly. Some of that is to do with the changing of regulations, not ICC but FIFA. But that's a whole other video for another day. But also, when Australia got better at football, there were certain names in the team. Mark Bresciano, John Alesi and Vince Grella. So they become really important Australian footballers. And Bresciano, Aloisi, Grella, those names, don't they also sound a little bit Italian? Because they all have family from Italy as well. So you have this incredibly weird situation when you think about it. That Australia qualifies for the Football World Cup with the help of people whose families had immigrated there from Italy. So it's a pretty fair trade when you think about it. Australia is currently helping Italy qualify for the Cricket World Cup. But Italy helped Australia qualify for the Football World Cup, right? I mean, that is a symbiotic relationship that we are talking about between these two countries who are, let's be honest, a long way on the map from each other. But perhaps the most incredible thing when you think of Italy and World Cups and football and cricket right now is the fact that the Italian men's cricket team has qualified for the World Cup. And as it currently stands, the Italian men's football team may not qualify for the World Cup. How much has sport changed when Italy might be in a cricket World Cup, but not in a football World Cup? Who's the global game now? I mean, it's still football, but who's the global game now? Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs. And Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting.